Hello and good evening to all members and officers and all of those watching from home. This is the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, 17th of February, and it's now just gone 5:30. As I'm sure you'll all be aware, this is a remote meeting. We will therefore have participation via what's called a remote blue hand that I will see, but for those of you watching at home, you won't. And I will then call members to ask their questions. If members have a supplementary question, they will raise a physical hand, which I will hopefully see, given we're a small committee, I should be able to. We will have officers joining us depending on which agenda item we're on at any given time. I will ask the officers when they first start to speak to introduce themselves and give their job title. That would be incredibly helpful for everybody. We have declarations of interest as the first agenda item. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Since we're discussing COVID-19 grants, I should declare that I am now the temporary, unpaid, 0 hours employee of a company owned by a relative which received a COVID-19 discretionary grant in 2020. I don't think it affects my judgment on this in any way, shape or form.
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much for telling us that. And I suppose, oh, you've raised your hand again. No, it's down again. And I suppose just for complete transparency, I have been liaising with the Veritao team regarding a ward issue and a possible fraud case. Again, I don't feel it's prejudicial. I don't think it will impact on anything that we will be covering this evening. Agenda item 2 is public participation. Before we get on to agenda item 2, I would just like to thank Councillor Fisher for chairing the last meeting at very short notice. So I'm incredibly grateful, and I did watch most of the committee. And he chaired it with aplomb. So thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for stepping into the breach. Now to go back to public participation, and that's why it prompted me to thank you, Councillor Fisher, because we have two members of the public, both who have regularly spoken, but neither of them who spoke at the last meeting, if I remember correctly. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Andy Mendes. Are you there, Andy?
Hello.
Hello. Now, I hope you're well. You've got
thank you.
3 minutes. And I will time you whenever you want to start.
Okay. Well, I was at the last meeting.
Oh, you were? Sorry.
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry. I know my place. So anyway, and actually it ties in nicely. We're obviously synchronized because I'm beginning to realize how difficult it is for members of the public when dealing with council committees, especially when we can't come and sit in to eyeball members and officers, and you've just made my point. So 2 points I wanted to make today. First, on the audit. In the 20th of November meeting, I think Max acknowledged an oversight such that no audit reports for 2019-20 had been made public on the council website, and he agreed to rectify things as soon as possible. And following that, 3 completed reports have been added to the website. I think the 3 that should have been published with the November papers. And thank you for that, Max, or whoever did it. But I believe there is still quite a significant gap in publication for many of the 2019-20 reports completed earlier in the year. For instance, the health and safety and the home working report showing in December 2019 as draft report published. They haven't appeared, and as from a quick calculation, there are more than 20 where an opinion is given in the July 2020 annual report, but which I don't think are available to the likes of me. So would it please be possible to correct this? Max knows how much I enjoy health and safety and indeed absence management reports. So moving on to current audit, in the 2021-22 proposed plan, I wonder whether it would be timely to review Section 106 performance and reporting again. There were several commitments made during the 2017-18 audit, which I fear may have fallen by the wayside. And I think planning generally, and 106 in particular, remain of considerable interest and concern to the city. The last I saw it was in CCMMSC in July 2019, when a new system was proposed, which would make everything wonderful. And I've heard that before, and notwithstanding, I would be very interested in the current position. I suspect events, dear boy, have intervened and nothing's happened, but I'd be interested to know. That's it on audit. My other point is on the work plan, and if you like, here was the frustration. In the November 2020, the 20th November meeting, the chair undertook to honour the committee's wish, this is the previous committee's wish, to receive an annual review of NDAs and settlements. I still don't see it in the published plan with today's papers. So that's it from Frustrated of Oswaldwick. I'll see you next time, hopefully. Cheers.
Thank you, Andy. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that most of the points that you've raised will be covered later in the meeting when we get to those agenda items. Well, I hope you'll be pleasantly surprised.
That would be nice.
Well, it's always nice. Well, look after yourself, and I'm sure we'll see you at next committee.
I hope so, and you too. Thanks very much, everybody. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Our second speaker is Gwen Swinburne. And can you hear me, Gwen?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Chair?
Perfectly. Now, I don't believe you were at the last meeting.
No, I'm sorry, I missed it, Chair.
So you're not going to get 6 minutes. Yes,
no,
it's a first, but you're not getting 6 minutes just because I'm chairing. So,
okay, Chair.
So if you'd like to start whenever, I'll put the timer on and we shall give you a notification with a few seconds to go.
Thank you, Chair. We were assured many months ago by the monitoring officer how everything was back on track, how marvellous Zoom meetings are, and that they should continue regardless. I'm afraid then, as now, her words did and do not reflect any semblance of reality. The slovenly mismanagement of this committee gets worse by the month, with more steps back than forwards, despite members' valiant efforts. Last time we had the missing audit report and an appearance again of the NDA report. This month, from the section responsible for timeliness of responses, a very late and back of the flag packet governance report, so poorly presented it can hardly be discussed, and the quarterly minutes. In order to address this slovenliness, may I ask, Chair, that you insist on each of the following items being put on the forward plan with named staffer responsibilities and dates. 1, the missing NDA report. 2, a report to the next committee on the immediate.
No. Gwen, I'm afraid we've lost you. I'm sure by accident rather than design. Richard, have you managed to, have we lost Gwen?
It's a bit of an odd one. She appears to be still in the call, but we can't hear her and she's not muted. So it could be a problem with her phone. it could be a Zoom issue, but there's not much we can do apart from we could try dialing her back in again.
Yes, should we do that? Monitoring officer, can I just ask, should we wait or can we move on and then come back to Gwen?
That's your gift, Chair,
is it?
for your discretion. What I would say is that she's only got the time remaining available. So of the 3 minutes, you need to account for the time that she's had. I think it was about a minute, I think.
Yeah, I
So
think it was
she'd only
just
have,
over a minute.
For example, she'd only have the remainder of the 3 minutes available, so she couldn't start the 3 minutes again. But it is your discretion. Obviously, if there's technical problems, it may be a while for her to rejoin. So you may want to start the next agenda item and intervene, bring her in at a later stage. It's your gift.
Yeah, she's just coming back in now.
Oh, rightio.
So hi, it's Richard here, Gwen. If you could try unmuting and resuming where you left off, if possible.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm
Yes.
back.
Now we lost you. There was something about slovenliness that I recall, and the next bit I remember
a little list.
was instructions. You mentioned NDAs, and then I think we lost you after that.
Oh, that's great. I'll start then. So it's just 8 individual matters. 1, the missing NDA report. 2, a report to the next committee on the immediate recruitment of independent persons for both audit and governance. It may serve the statutory officers to not have these positions filled. It does not serve democracy. 3, a report for the brief on the brief for and timescale of the update of the Constitution and the related external consultations. We've seen nothing. 4, a report on how the administration's commitment to returning to a committee system is being addressed, including timescale. 5, a review of the governance of all our TCAL companies, SLAs, shareholder committee, scrutiny, director conflicts and reporting requirements. 6, as the monitoring officer stated in another committee, she is keen to look at recent public interest reports. Will you now insist she does an update to this committee of the action plan of the Floyd Public Interest Report, which, despite what you have been told, is implemented only partially? I have done most of the work for her. 7, Chair, the statutory officers continue in breach of the law and the most basic standard practice to never consult on our draft budget. They were forced to admit this in public under threat of the High Court from the ICO. Can we have a report on how this basic right can be achieved this year after a decade of failure? Finally, Chair, as part of the accounts inspection, I review the many reserve accounts and extraordinarily high procurement waivers. May I ask that you require twice yearly reports on these matters in, say, June and December? Yeah, I'll send this through because I know it was a long list.
I was just going to say that's an incredibly long list, not all of which I'm going to be able to remember.
No, I'll send it through.
And you finished perfectly, just within 3 minutes. So.
Oh, thank you very much. I was racing along.
No, very impressive. So I'm just trying to switch my timer off now. There we go. So yes, thank you, Gwen. And again, I think a number of the points that you've made will be covered further in the meeting, but perhaps not all of them. So if you can email that to myself and to the monitoring officer and the section 151, I'm sure we will endeavour to make a response to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, thank you, members. We can now move on to agenda item 3, the Counter Fraud Framework Update. Oh, Councillor Lomas. Sorry. Yes, we did lose you for 1 second, didn't we?
You did lose me for a couple of minutes. My internet at home has disappeared. I've connected by phone It's not a brilliant signal. So from time to time, I may need to just switch my camera off if I need to speak, and the connection's not great, just to give the bandwidth to get my voice across, if that's okay with everyone. Hopefully it'll hold up, but just in case.
No, well, it looks a good picture to me, yeah, no, absolutely, thank you. And as you probably heard, we have lost Gwen, so I don't think you actually missed anything from the public participant. Yes, agenda item 3, the counter fraud framework update, and I'd like to welcome Max Thomas. And have you brought anybody with you? Jonathan, yes. Max, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Max Thomas. I'm from Verito, the Council's shared service company, and I'm the Council's head of internal audit. And Jonathan is joining us in the meeting tonight. So,
Jonathan, would you introduce yourself and your role?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm the Assistant Director for Corporate Fraud within Verito, and part of my role is to manage counter fraud work at City of York Council.
Right, that was quite quiet. Could everybody hear that? Yeah, perfect. Max.
Okay, Chair. So this report outlines changes to the Council's counter fraud policy framework to reflect newly updated national guidance and also the ever-changing landscape of fraud risks facing local government. The last significant review of the policy framework took place in 2017. In the covering report, we summarise some of the new and emerging issues which local authorities are facing. These include fraud related to the payment of the various COVID-19 business grants, as well as the increasing threats from cyber attacks. And it is worth noting, I think, that 2 councils have suffered quite serious cyber attacks within the last 12 months. So just turning to the policy framework, a refreshed national counter fraud strategy for local government called Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally was published last April. We've included a copy of the national strategy at Annex 1 in the report for information. We've now updated the Council's own strategy so that it aligns with the national strategy. So the refreshed Council strategy is attached at Annex 2 to the report. And this includes an action plan which is intended to help us deliver against the strategic priorities set out in the strategy. We've also produced our regular annual fraud risk assessment, and this reflects the main fraud risks currently facing the council, but also the sort of wider local government community. So the fraud risk assessment is attached to Annex 3. And finally, we've made some fairly limited changes to the council's counter fraud and corruption policy. That's attached as Annex 4, and those changes are shown as tracked changes. So very happy to take questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. This is obviously a very, very serious issue. I mean, looking at page 2, I mean, the council in the northeast, it's fairly well known which council it was. It was a unitary similar in size to York, a little bit smaller. They reckon they lost not only access to services, but £10.4 million in revenue to rectify the issues. The first question is, does this council have any access to any recourse to central government or insurance or any way of protecting itself financially against this? Because for me, a loss of 10.4 million, it's of the same order of magnitude as the shortfall on COVID spending, which the government hasn't reimbursed this council despite its promise to do so. You know, this is obviously a massive budgetary issue. Do we have any recourse to any compensation?
Councillor Fisher, I mean, I agree that for that particular council, it had a number of quite devastating effects. One was the loss of services. but also the cost of actually putting things right. Now, my understanding is that there's still discussions ongoing between that council and central government about how much additional funding might be provided to sort of compensate for those costs. I'm not party to those, so no. I can't really add much to that. I don't really know whether York has got insurance in place. I know some councils do have that.
Councillor, can I just ask a supplementary before I go to Councillor Webb? So, would that critical loss issue be something that you would feel that, as the internal auditors, is something that the council ought to have in place?
That is very much a policy decision. It's not something I think I would want to comment on.
Right.
As auditors, I think what we would be looking for is that the council has got plans in place to recover from a cyber incident if one occurs, and that those plans are subject to sort of regular testing. So those are the sort of measures that we would normally expect to see.
Right, but it wouldn't be about what strategies it has in place should a catastrophic loss occur.
Well, we would expect plans, disaster recovery plans, to be in place, and those plans to be enabled and regularly tested, because that's the key. Actually, it's how quickly you can recover from one of these sorts of attacks, and that you are able to maintain a level of service despite perhaps losing all or most of your IT systems.
And are you reassured of that, or are you assured of that? That disaster recovery plan is in place and it is robust?
It's a little while since we've looked at disaster recovery plans, and that's probably
it's an audit.
Yeah,
I can feel an audit coming on.
That is one of the areas that, for all our member councils, we are looking at a number of things. One is raising awareness of the threat of cyber attack, but also making sure that those councils have got in place proper disaster recovery plans.
Councillor Webb, sorry.
Yeah, Max, I bet you're glad you turned up now. Right, so I think with my question, on page 14 of our report, it's the executive summary bit. There's a couple of those 6 different culture, capability, competence, capacity, communication, and collaboration. Very clever. I think the 2 that I'm interested in is capability and capacity. Obviously, as council budgets are incredibly tight and have become more and more constrained over the last decade, you know, how are we faring in terms of our enforcement? And I know on page 24, for example, there's sort of a discussion of the general expectation of how we can work in terms of capability and what we can do to actually make sure that we are recovering funds. But I suppose the problem is if we don't have the people to do it. And then on page 40, which is a slightly different annex, I think this is, the counter fraud and corruption strategy for York for the next few years. About halfway down, it says, however, as the capability and capacity of the council to prevent and detect fraud has increased. Could you just explain, how is it increased at the moment? What are people doing? And I suppose, given everything that's happening, how have we increased our capacity to deal with that issue? And I've got a follow-on, but I think it'd be easier to answer that bit first. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan may want to add to this, but I actually think York is in a very strong position. Less than half of local authorities have got access to a dedicated counter-fraud resource. York has always taken the issue quite seriously and has invested resources in establishing and maintaining that sort of resource. So York has got that access, and because we're a shared service, we can continue to invest and build that resource, so we're staying up to date with all the relevant sort of techniques and measures that you might expect. So I think for York, you're in a very good position. You have got that capability, and it's proved to be effective. So I think that should hopefully reassure you. In terms of the comment about it increasing, well, that's a reflection of the fact that our corporate fraud team has continued to expand as we've had new member councils join Veritone, and that operating as a shared service gives us that benefit. So we can invest in the sort of tools and techniques that you need to be able to maintain your sort of fraud defences. Don't know if Jonathan wants to add to that.
Just to concur with you, Max, I think we have a high-performing team. We have a lot of very professional people working for City of York Council, and their expertise in different areas of fraud have increased tremendously over the past few years. We have a trainee program. A number of our trainees are fully trained up, and now they specialize in different areas of fraud. So, for example, we have specialisms in adult social care fraud or council tax fraud. And when I look around the country nationally in terms of counter fraud, I don't see other teams having this level of knowledge within their teams. So I think York should be reassured.
Thank you. Councillor Webb, you had a supplementary or an additional question.
Yes, thank you. And it's very good to know that, actually. And I think that yeah, you've explained that very well. I think my follow-on would be, again, as budgets are made tighter. I mean, a good example is the COVID-19 fraud, for example. So we're in a situation in York that, as Councillor Fisher alluded to earlier, there's quite a large gap in the budget. And obviously it would be great to recover as much funding as we can. I just wondered, is there any data on sort of shifting trends between the I don't know, severity of the punishment or the frequency of punishment of people who have committed frauds and time? So over time, have we got better at collecting data from people? And I suppose my question is, because I'm rambling, my question is, when someone gets accused of, or you have committed fraud, and actually that person wasn't clear that they had committed fraud, it's just they didn't understand the system, have we got harsher in assessing that and then suggesting, as we do on page 71, that on 4.3 of page 71, and this is related to people with ill health or disability, if someone has misunderstood the rules, and then the last sentence of that says, however, simple ignorance of the law will not prevent prosecution. Have we got to a situation where that has increased, got worse over time? Sorry, that was a very long
What a question.
Sorry, there was a lot of rambling. Apologies.
Who can answer that? Jonathan?
I think that over the last few years, we've looked at different ways of dealing with fraud that occurs. So I think we prosecute less people than we did 10 years ago, but we issue a lot more warnings to people. And we look to prosecute criminals. That's the remit of a counter fraud team. We're not out to trap people or to catch people who have simply made mistakes. We don't accuse people of committing fraud. We talk to them about a suspicion that they may have committed a criminal offense. And we give everyone an absolute opportunity to defend themselves, and we take what they say to us very seriously. So I think that we do the right thing, and we get and if we do prosecute somebody, we prosecute somebody because they have committed a criminal offense, not because they've made a mistake. And but the fraud team does find a lot of error. We just deal with it in a different way. I hope that answers the question. I think I'm rambling now. So.
No, nowhere near as much. Before I go to Councillor Mason, I just want to say that Councillor Lomas is still in the meeting. It's just she's turned her camera off so she can hear slightly better. Councillor Mason.
Thanks. I probably should have got it in earlier as a supplementary to the point Councillor Fisher raised, but I think it would be interesting to know a bit more about that kind of normal process for approval of the disaster management recovery plans. Is that something that we would normally have oversight of, given the kind of really significant risk around economic crime? And is there a timeline for when we'd next see that type of thing? Maybe one more for Jenny, is it?
Is that something you can answer, Max?
Well, as I say, I think this is probably one of our priorities for audit in the coming year, or as soon as possible, really, given where we see the risk across local government. So I think once we do that audit, we'll have a better understanding of perhaps where the council is placed.
So we wouldn't normally see kind of disaster recovery things as an audit committee, apart from if it came through as concerns or the opposite from an audit.
Right. I'm going to ask Janie, the monitoring officer, and or the Section 151 officer, if they could just have an input into that question.
So for me, you may not see the exact planning, but you'd look at the key corporate risks that we have and look at how we monitor and measure that against the key corporate risks that we have. Is that it's quite a major incident for the council, so you would look at that. I would agree that it's probably appropriate for Max to look at the council's arrangements and then offer you the level of assurance or not, and also any potential recommendations that then you can feed into the key corporate risk register that you are the custodian of. So it might be, rather than predetermine or put Max in a difficult position, it may be that you recommend to Max to look at that, probably work with myself and Debbie and other key officers in the council, and then feed back to you independently on the strength or not of it, or areas for improvement.
Yeah, no, just so I understood the backstory of, because I've only been on here a couple of years.
Yeah.
How recently that was looked at, or how often, or what the process was. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, that's Max.
Yeah, if I can also add, the particular council in the northeast, that they've been very open about some of the lessons that have been learned, and they've been sharing that across the local government community. So I think it's a shame that they were hit, but obviously other councils can learn and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Are there any other questions? If not, I've got to a couple of questions that I've got. Councillor Webb.
Hello, apologies. I'll try and be more brief this time. On page 42, the Counter Fraud and Corruption Strategy Action Plan, reference number 3. So it says policies are in place to enable the council to undertake covert surveillance under the regular. I was just wondering if you could explain that item to me a little bit. And then my final point for today was on page 50, which is regarding essentially reviewing COVID-19 grants that have been issued to look for fraud. Has any resource from government been made available in order to help process that job, or is it just expected that you're going to do it as part of the normal everyday services that you do every other year? So yeah, there are 2 questions. Thanks.
Okay, on the surveillance question, the council does undertake surveillance. It's mostly trading standards who do that, but occasionally other services will, and that includes Verita. We will occasionally undertake covert surveillance. Occasionally some of that surveillance will be involving employees of the council. Having said that, it's it doesn't happen very often. There is a RIPA lead officer within the council, and it's her responsibility to make sure that the council is sort of complying with legislation. So we just need to, part of this action plan, it's just making sure that the activities that we undertake alongside other activities in surveillance activities are being undertaken in accordance with the law. So hopefully that answers that question. The
funding.
Yes, that's actually a good question. Actually, we've been providing a lot of support to the council, both with pre and post assurance work. The council has the ability to claim costs related to COVID. I'm not quite sure that they've included the costs that the cost of the work that we've been doing. I can't answer that.
Can I ask Section 151? Are you aware of whether that's been reclaimed or whether there's been a contribution from government to that?
We haven't actually. We've included some of those costs, but obviously because we didn't get enough in the grant, it's it's fighting over a small pot of money. What I will go away and check is we did get what's called new burdens money, whereas when the government puts a new burden on us, we get it's a very small amount of funding. So I'll check with Max outside the meeting to just confirm what the additional costs are and see if we've got some new burdens money that we would be able to use to fund that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And if there is anything, I just wonder whether it could be conveyed to the Democratic Services Officer to incorporate within the minutes. That would be, I think that'd be quite helpful, because otherwise it'll get lost. Couple of questions I've got. In the national strategy, the local response, page 33, it said, is there a portfolio holder who has fraud within their remit? Does York have a portfolio holder that has fraud within their remit? Sorry, I'll just ask that question first. That's an easy one.
I think so, but I'll need to check that.
It's actually a responsibility of the Section 151. So do you know, Debbie, who's
yeah, the executive member for finance and performance
has fraud
but because
within.
he also sits on the board at Verito, doesn't he, Max?
He does.
Yeah. So it's part of his remit as finance and performance, is my understanding.
Right, that's lovely. Then I've got a question about data matching, which was on the same page that Councillor Webb pointed out earlier. I think it's 50 odd. What is data matching, and who's responsible for it?
Okay, so data matching is just the process of taking data from one system and matching identical fields to data taken from another system and seeing whether the data matches, and that right. Technique is used to identify discrepancies or gaps or things. Sometimes there'll be matches that you shouldn't get, but you do if you run these exercises. So that's the process. It does involve specialist software to do it. You need to sort of extract the data from systems and put it into a separate system, and then do the data matches and see what comes out. It takes a bit of expertise, because you have to design the scripts in such a way that you are coming up with positive matches rather than sort of false negatives and that sort of thing. So it's quite, you have to do it quite carefully. The Cabinet Office run the national data matching exercise, which is known as the National Fraud Initiative. So they take data from all local authorities and other public sector bodies. It's a very big process, and they do a lot of matching, and you get a lot of output from that exercise. So they run that exercise. The main exercise is done every 2 years. We also undertake local data matching. So we might match data from systems within the council against data taken from other systems to see if there's discrepancies. So that would be a local data match. And then on other occasions, we will match with neighbouring authorities. There are clearly data protection implications when you're doing this sort of exercise. So it has to be done very carefully, and you have to make sure that you do all the sort of data protection impact assessments and so on before you even start doing any sort of data matching.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas. Nice to see you again.
Sorry, I had to turn my camera off.
No, I've said that, it's fine.
Signal's just not great. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, fine.
I just wanted to pick up, and I don't know really whether this is a question for Max or not. I'm looking at the counter fraud and corruption policy. So is that do I direct that to you, Max, or is it for Janie? I'm just not clear.
You can direct it to me. And
you have a go, and
I'll have a go.
I'm sure somebody will be able to help me.
Jonathan.
Thank you. I'm just looking, and I note on page 59 in the principles, it discusses fraud or corruption in the administration of the responsibilities of the council, and that's the only real mention I could find of members. Or all of the rest seems to focus far more on staff or residents. I don't know whether I've just missed it because there's there's quite a lot of words in these documents, but I couldn't see anything about fraud and corruption relating to members' activities.
Well, the policy is meant to be overarching, so it does include employees, contractors, members, and members of the public and suppliers. So it could be anyone associated with the council in some way who may or may not commit fraud and corruption. So I think it does. Well, it is intended to include elected members. Maybe we perhaps can make that clearer.
I think that would be, I think that for me, it would be useful to make it clearer.
Oh no, we've just lost you now.
That was the only real kind of mention I saw. Oh, sorry.
Could you just repeat what you just said, Katie?
Yeah,
is that all right?
Yeah, I've just turned off my camera. Hopefully that'll give enough bandwidth for you to hear me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's a lot clearer now.
Oh, good. I won't name and shame my internet provider, but I'll be having a little chat with them later. I think it would be helpful to make it more explicitly clear that this applies to elected members as well, because on my first reading of it, I thought, oh well, this is just about staff and all the others that you listed, and then I was kind of looking for an annex or something relating to members. So for me, I think it should be more explicitly clear, because as elected members, we're still responsible for what happens to the resources of the council.
Yeah, we can do that. We can look again.
Thank you. I mean, just keep persevering, Katie. If you have to switch off, switch off. I still see the hand coming up. Well, somebody tells me that the hand's gone up, so that's fine. Are there any other questions in relation to this agenda item from colleagues? No. Well, there are some recommendations. We're asked to comment on the new counter fraud and corruption strategy and action plan and the fraud assessment and counter fraud and corruption policies in annexes 2, 3 and 4. I'm satisfied that we've given those some significant consideration. We have made some recommendations for Max to take on board. And I'm sure we've got the commitment that you will amend the strategy. Councillor Lomas is just telling me she's still here. Well, yes, we know. You know, that you will undertake to make that amendment as raised by Councillor Lomas. Is that agreed? Members? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Max and Jonathan. I don't know if you're staying for the next agenda item. Well, one of you is. So we now move on to agenda item 4, which is the internal audit plan consultation. Max, we've got you again.
Thank you, Chair. It's me again. So we are currently in the process of identifying the priorities for internal audit for next year. And as part of that process, we're asking for the views of audit and governance. In line with best practice, the programme of internal audit work will focus on the areas of most risk to the council, as well as those systems and processes which contribute most to the council's objectives. So at this stage, we are consulting with council officers, we're reviewing the council's corporate risk registers, we're identifying issues through our national and regional networks, we're taking account of our recent audit work and the results of any other relevant audit or inspection reports, as well as any other emerging issues or risks that we think are relevant. So the plan itself will be presented to the committee at its April meeting. It's worth noting that that plan will be high level and it will be a flexible programme of work. So we will keep it under review throughout the year, make sure that we make changes to keep it relevant to the needs of the council. So it is a much more fluid type approach than perhaps we've seen in past years, but that's very much the way internal audit is now going. In this report, in paragraph 8, we've included a list of possible topics and areas for audit. The list is really intended to prompt a discussion around possible priorities, and it's not meant to be a definitive or complete list. So if you think there are gaps, then obviously we're keen to hear about that. So happy to take questions or comments or suggestions from the committee.
Thank you. Before I go on to questions, Max, can I just ask if you can address the points that were raised by Mr. Mendes about previous audits that he felt weren't covered on the website, and recommendations that he flagged up from 2019 to 20?
Okay, I'll need to go back to check that. Some of those reports, because of COVID and the sort of disruption around sort of March, April, May time, some of those reports were actually not finalised. So I think they were issued in draft, but they weren't formally signed off, given what was happening. So I'll need to go back and check what the status is, and if we have missed any, we can certainly publish them.
Great, yes. So if they could be published without you having to come back to us to say they need to be published.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Questions, colleagues. Councillor Webb, I've got raising his hand first.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the list, I thought that, I don't know, when I was reading it through and thinking what things have happened this year, what stuff has gone on sort of this year within the council sort of structures. Two things that I thought about, and it might not be, I don't know, this might not be something you could audit, or it might be, that's what I'm asking your advice on, would be obviously the change of structure we moved from a CEO structure to a COO structure. And I suppose my question would be, you know, how does that affect the council's ability to look outwards? Because typically you'd imagine that the CEO is someone who looks outwards. The chief operating officer, however, is more focused internally. So how has that changed? That seems to be quite a big change for a council. So it's something that we might want to look at. You might want to advise on whether that's a thing you could look at. And the other one for me is sort of, I spend, when I'm not focusing on A&G papers, I spend a lot of time working sort of the children's sort of area of the council's function. And obviously we've just rearranged sort of the director position so that we've now got director of people to sort of replace director sort of adults social care and children's social care, two separate people. And I just was thinking that again is a big shift and will have a massive impact on those areas. And I know, for example, there's a section on procurement and contract management, for example. Now those traditionally will have had two separate pots, and actually they might now be merged. And things like that, you know, the rearrangement of that people directorate, there's probably a lot in there that we could look at now, so that in, you know, 3 or 4 years time, we don't then realize it once everything's knitted together. It'd be nice to sort of look at it early to get an initial idea of things that are working and things that maybe need strengthening. So yeah, so they will be sort of my two suggestions off the top of my head as things that when I look through this, I thought maybe there could be something extra there, but yes.
Can I just ask, Bob, whether you're talking about the corporate restructure as a whole, or just those two specific roles?
I think for me, I think you could do a job of work on the corporate restructure as a whole, because it's kind of affected lots of areas, but I strongly feel that we should look at those two roles. But I'd happily take advice on whether that is something you can audit and how you would go about something like that.
Max.
Okay, so in terms of corporate restructures, I think we're probably not best placed to sort of assess how effective and whether they've actually delivered their objectives. I don't think we're probably best placed to do that. What we would be looking at, though, is making sure that decision-making processes, management of risks, schemes of delegation, the sort of the processes and functions that support the effective operation and management of those services. So we would, you know, that could be an area of audit, but whether the restructure has actually delivered against its original objectives, I don't think that's probably for us to do.
You've got a supplementary, Bob?
Yeah,
Councillor Webb?
It's all right, Mike. Yeah, no, I think that that is kind of what I was getting at, Max. I think it's that decision making. If you've got one person who's suddenly director of you know, a much larger service, how are things not going to get missed? How are things going to be delegated? So that's kind of where I'm getting at there. Could you just, I mean, how would that be? And Janie, you might want to jump in here. I don't know. How would that be assessed over time?
In terms of the corporate director of people role, the corporate director of people role.
Well, that and the
division,
and the COO role,
and the CEO structure.
So in respect of the corporate director of people role, that is very much as Max has already referenced, which is the scheme of delegation for the two sets of statutory functions. So Amanda is currently carrying the statutory functions of Director of Children's Services and the statutory function of Director of Adult Social Services. What is absolutely integral to those roles is how Amanda delegates those statutory functions down to the appropriate skilled professional officers and at the correct levels, so that there is an assurance downwards that she's got the right staff doing the right jobs at the right levels and making the right decisions, and there's an assurance upwards that she is satisfied that the statutory requirements of her global job role are being met. I think there is scope within that. I'm not sure if it's this committee. I think this committee needs to be assured that there is a scheme of delegation in place that will come with the restructured or refreshed constitution as well, because I do want to put more focus onto the scheme of delegation, especially where we've got a really sort of big role like that with a lot of risk. And I think Amanda would probably appreciate that support of the assurance, giving the assurance of this committee and having the assurance of this committee that those are being fulfilled. I think in terms of the Chief Operating Officer role, I think it's still being embedded. It's still a new post for the council, and we've still got to go through the structure. But again, it's back to the scheme of delegation as well. It currently is a consultation on the senior management restructure, and it is very much then about how the functions of that particular role are delegated through whatever the corporate management team may look like as well. But there's also some statutory functions in there which are separate, which is the head of paid service functions. So we just need to look at how those are carried out as well. So their head of paid service functions are the same regardless of whether we had a chief executive or a chief operating officer. So there's two distinct areas there. But I think for the COO, I think that work will come when the structure is finalised.
I was just going to say, I mean, would we be talking about, if we were able to audit that assurance of delegation processes, it would be post constitution being
I think
approved,
it would be
given some time to bed in the existing process. So it could be towards the end of the.
I think it would be. Yes, because I think as the monitoring officer, and I think also probably shared by Debbie as well as a Section 151, is that we both need the assurance that the Constitution is being followed, and that means that every element of the Constitution, because we can't possibly know everything in our job roles around the delegated functions. So part of us going forward is asking this committee to ensure that there is an annual fit for purpose test of the Constitution, which is, I think, been neglected in the past, and also that it remains fit for purpose. And part of that is a test against the scheme of delegation, is a test around the levels of decision making. Are the right people making the right decisions on the right issues? And you do that by looking at starting with the Constitution and working from that, because that is the kind of toolkit where we start from. And Max would need the Constitution to be finalised so that he has got that baseline framework to start any work from. So that is certainly my focus of it, and my sort of aspiration really in terms of going forward. I don't know if Debbie or Max want to say anything. Chair.
That makes sense. Sorry, does anybody want to add anything? Max?
Yeah, I was going to agree with Jenny, but I think it's actually worth having the Constitution, new Constitution adopted, and for it to be operating for a period of time, for us then to be able to properly assess it.
But we could incorporate powers of delegation and assurance that is working effectively and achieves the outcomes as stated within those areas of job responsibility. And that would possibly fall under either service-related areas or strategic risks. Would you agree with that? It doesn't really matter where it goes, but
yes,
it's just where I thought that would lend itself.
I mean, we flag up schemes of delegation within the top headings, so strategic risks and corporate processes. That's where we would look to see that.
Right, I'm going to move on from that question, and I'm going to ask Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much. This is another of those that might possibly be under audit, might possibly under governance. I'm not sure. Michael and I discussed it at a meeting. We had a chat the other night about this, and it's to do with reporting back to council members on decisions made at full council. Now, obviously that falls under procedures and so on, because I'm concerned that we go through a lot of grief to get policies adopted at full council, and some of them sort of disappear into the ether and we never hear from them again, whereas others pop up from time to time on scrutiny and service committees. And I'd just like to see if you feel that audit could look at that to try and make sure that there is a a well-defined way of reporting back to members exactly what progress has been made on each of those council policies, and maybe whether we need to do some kind of amendment to the Constitution to actually set in stone that when a policy is actually passed by full council, it is then followed through, and the issues are, you know, the progress is reported to members of council.
Yes, I mean,
sorry, Jenny.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Do you mean outcomes following motions made?
Yes.
Full
yeah,
council.
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what
yeah.
what you're?
What I mean,
I
yeah.
mean, I think to be honest, just to add to Councillor Fisher's point, I think those members who have proposed motions at full council, which have been approved and accepted by full council, very often they never hear from them again, and it does, I feel, leave a significant gap, because, you know, we very often have members of the public also wanting to contribute and to speak on those. Tony, sorry.
To give you an example, I put forward a motion about a year ago about improving autism training for those who have face-to-face contact. It was fairly uncontroversial. I think it got multi-party support. No one disagreed with it. I've never heard a thing about it. I don't know whether any training's been done. And I just think we need follow-up to ensure that, you know, those decisions, which are motions adopted by full council, are actually enacted, and that we know they've been enacted.
So if I may just respond, and then perhaps Max might want to comment after this. I'm not overly sure. I think there is two strands of this. I'm not overly sure that what you're asking for is actually the role of this committee. I think you may have to consider asking a scrutiny committee to look at the council motions. I think what you would need to look at is maintaining the overarching ability that the Constitution allows for motions to be made freely to full council, so long as it's within the council's gift. You know, it's a service that the council can actually do, and it's not sort of, you know, totally unlawful for us to do. So it may be actually looking at the operational follow through of motions once they pass by full council. You may want to ask a scrutiny committee to pick that up on your behalf, to look at the operational ability. But for me, it's the strategic ability within the Constitution that allows motions to be freely made at a full council meeting, where you would want that assurance that there is that ability to have that democratic input. But you might want to ask the scrutiny committee to look at specific outcomes. That one, for example, that Councillor Fisher's raised on autism, you may want to ask the Children's Scrutiny Committee to pick that up and see where it's up to and report back to you. And that's how you get your form of assurance on that. So that's just my observation at the moment.
With respect, it's not always clear which scrutiny committee, because I mean, that's more to do with staff training than actually, you know, because a lot of the people you're going to be dealing with are not children. They're going to be adults who come into these, you know, to require.
If in doubt, we've got the corporate scrutiny, which is overarching.
I was just going to suggest that, Jenny. To be honest, this is. Oh, Dawn's wanting to chip in now as well. Dawn, can you introduce yourself and give your title?
Yeah, Head of Civic Democratic and Scrutiny Services. It's not a question of want, Chair. It's more a question of just wanted to add to what Jenny was saying before, because actually it is on CSMC's work plan, is this item.
Is it?
Some time to actually look at this kind of process.
I was just going to refer it to CSMC to look at.
Already on their work plan. We had a conversation about it at the last work planning session.
I don't think there's any harm in you re-referring it to corporate scrutiny. It is on their work programme, but actually the fact that you can make a formal recommendation for it to be considered, I think, to the chair and vice chair of that committee, I think they'd probably welcome that. So.
Can I just ask though, both you and Max, is this a internal audit issue at this stage? I suppose the internal audit bit would be, are the processes, once a motion has been approved, are they clear as to what happens to that motion subsequently and how that's fed back?
Certainly, that process could be something that audit would look at. We wouldn't look at. I don't think it's our role to take individual
no,
motions and make sure that
it's
they've been delivered. I think that is
as a
definitely
quantum.
a scrutiny function.
Yeah.
I agree. The process is something that internal audit could look at on our behalf. I'm also mindful as well that our internal audit day, I have to say this as the monitoring officer and the internal sort of client officer, is that our internal audit days that we purchase from Verito are very, very valuable to us. So I think, you know, I just go back to sort of Max's opening comments that the internal audit plan is flexible. And so I think what we would have to work on is the priority that particular audit function would have over and above something else, which may become apparent. So it may be that we'd like it, but is it a good time of very, very sort of finite days that we've got available? And are there other pressing matters that you'd like to see in a higher priority on the audit plan?
Point taken.
We have a limited pool, a number of. I'm trying to tactfully say we have a limited pool of days.
I think we got the the gist. In which case, can I ask members, are you happy for a re-referral to go to CSMC for them to ensure that this remains on their radar, and if they want to report back to us their findings, then that would be great. But as long as somebody's looking at it, happy? Yeah, great. Can I make a bid then? And I have spoken with both the Section 151 and the monitoring officer, and interestingly enough, and coincidentally, it was raised by Mr. Mendes earlier on, but it was also raised by a public speaker, I think, in the November meeting, which is Section 106. And I feel that it's an area that is opaque, certainly from a management of 106, and I did take the benefit of having a conversation with Janie earlier on this afternoon to broach it with her, and an end-to-end review of Section 106 would be something that I would pitch to committee as something that's being sadly not on our radar as far as I've been aware in recent years.
Chair, we did do an audit on Section 106 probably two or 3 years ago, and I think we actually concluded things were reasonably okay. There were some areas for improvement. So I'm not saying we can't do it. What I'm saying is it isn't actually that long ago that we looked at it, but I know it's an area that is of interest to elected members and members of the public, and is something that it does come up quite frequently as an area of possible concern.
Can I ask, sorry, I don't mean to dominate this bit, but can I ask the Section 151 officer if this is an area that you would still like an overarching review audit of, and you may be prepared to help Max with the exact wording of it, but do you feel it's an area that is ripe for another review?
I would say it's certainly an area that the council needs to improve in. I would perhaps at this point in time, given the points that have been made, and particularly the point that Janie raised about the value of audit hours, it's not something that at this point I would particularly want to spend a lot of Verito time on, because I think that we know what the issues are. We've just got to get on and sort them out. So
yeah, but if that's not been happening, I think we're talking about £8 million that's in the in the section 106.
I suppose I'm just not that I'm questioning what value internal audit had at all, but I'm not sure what Max could tell me on this that I don't already know, I suppose is what I'm saying. I don't know whether you've got a different view, Max, but that was where I'm at.
I mean, not audit's meant to add value, so I don't. There probably isn't a lot of value in doing an audit just to confirm what Debbie already knows. Where we can add value is if an internal review is done and there's actions taken to make those improvements. We can then come along afterwards and then check that those changes have had the desired effect.
And some areas where we do use Verito's expertise is to help us come up with some of that process, so that Max and the team's experience from working in other councils can sometimes help us just review a process before we do it, and then advise us of any potential pitfalls, rather than coming along at the end and telling us where it's gone wrong. So we might liaise with Verito at that point. But I mean, I get the message loud and clear. It needs to get sorted out, absolutely. So
I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to open it up to committee on this, because audit and governance has a role, and that role is to assess the audit, and where necessary, call officers into account, essentially. And you tell me I know where the problems are. You won't be telling me anything I don't know. But the fact is that there are problems there, and they are significant problems, and they're not getting addressed.
I don't know that they're significant problems. We might want to have a separate debate about that. But there are areas where we could improve, I would say, and that's what I'm focused on, is where are those areas that we can improve. Now, in any other year, we would have made a bit more progress on some of those areas of improvement. Clearly, for numerous reasons, the past 12 months, we haven't made as much progress in those areas for improvement than as we would have liked. So yeah, absolutely accept it's an area that needs work. I don't know that I would agree it's an area of significant risk or concern.
Sorry, I just heard slightly differently, but I'm going to open it up to members and gauge any thoughts. Councillor Mason.
I was just going to suggest, is it something that maybe a task and finish group could do a little bit of work, and then maybe that would inform a report for 6 months' time to show where to basically just maybe clarify those areas that do need improving, and sit down with Debbie and have some clear measurables to then bring a report back to audit in 6 months and say, this was what the group found at the time, this is where you want it to get towards, where are we?
So that would be economy in place, I take it.
Yeah, probably. I don't know if you could have a mix of people. You might find other councillors, I'm sure, that aren't on that committee, that sit on other committees that would have an interest in 106, maybe planning, or even people from this committee.
Dawn, you've come on screen, which means you need to say something.
Yeah, we got it wrong.
So you obviously can't commit scrutiny time. You can refer it to CSMC to considering allocating some work, but you can't sit here and allocate their time. And just to comment that they did look at, actually CSMC again has looked at section 106s in the not that distant past.
2019, I understand, and they did make some recommendations, but I don't know whether those recommendations have been carried through.
Right, okay.
Maybe it's just dusting that back off and saying, are these still areas that the 151 officer thinks are still the same issues of concern, and if not, where are we?
I can go away and look at the CSMC recommendations and get an update for members as to whether they've
if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'll do
if you wouldn't mind, and we'll look at it next. We'll look at it next time. Right. Sorry, did you have your hand up, Max? Because I was just about to move on from there.
Just pick up on what Debbie said. Again, we're very happy to provide sort of critical friend support to services as part of the sort of design and improvement process. So we can certainly include an allocation of time in the plan to do that, perhaps in addition to a follow-up review in a year's time.
Right. Okay, we'll move on. Are there any comments from members as to what we see in paragraph 8 whether there are any huge omissions other than the 106 that I brought up, and where we feel that priorities ought to be. And it's good to see that disaster recovery was in there already. And I'm just wondering whether what we heard earlier is such that disaster recovery ought to be one of the higher priorities for you sequencing your audits for the coming year. But I'll open that up to members and their thoughts. Anybody want to chip in? Councillor Fisher.
Yeah, basically, this council is here to provide services. If something disrupts those services so it can't provide them, that's a major problem. I think having an effective disaster recovery plan in place and ensuring that it is as near bomb-proof as possible is absolutely vital for the council. A council that can't provide its services is not any use.
Yeah. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, on the back of that, I'd say that there are some services that we could do to provide more, and that's not our fault, and that's not a judge of anybody else, but that's just the nature of the world we're in at the minute with limited budgets. And therefore, I do think there is a need, following on from what I said earlier, I think about the merging of the People Directorate. I do think there's a need to look carefully at the social care budget management, and also the bullet point underneath, the special educational needs and disability education and healthcare plans and processes. Those 2 points I would prioritise, because they are things that have changed quite a lot, are under a lot of pressure, and obviously directly affect people straight away.
Thank you. Did you catch that, Max?
Yes, I'm just making notes as we're going.
Yeah. So can I make a suggestion then, committee, that Max and the Section 151 officer and their team, when they come back in April with the finalised list, do give us a sense of where you see your priorities. Everybody happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we'll have a further debate. Great. Now then, I'm proposing that we have a short break now. It's now 10 to, nearly 10 to 7. Come back at 7? How's that sound? Yeah, everybody happy? Yeah. See you all at 7 then.
Yeah, you ready to start, Chair?
Thank you very much. Right, welcome back, everybody. Part 2 of Audit and Governance Committee, 17th of February, and we're moving on to agenda item 5, which I think is the last agenda item involving Verito. So, Max, I'll hand over to you one more time.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our regular progress report, where we update the committee on internal audit and counter fraud work completed in the period since the last progress report to the committee, which was back in November. Annex 1 lists the current status of programmed internal audit work. And as the committee will note, all that work has either started or is well progressed. Annex 2 summarises the counter fraud activity that we've completed in the period. And again, just draw the committee's attention to the fact that we've already exceeded the target for fraud savings, as well as surpassing the total for the whole of the previous year. So very happy to take any questions on this report.
Colleagues. Well, can I just ask, it's interesting that you say that, that you've already exceeded the target. Is that because of the nature of the investigations? Is it a larger number of successful investigations, or is it a smaller number with higher values?
There are different factors. So we are doing more work in adult social care, and where we do identify fraud, the size of that fraud tends to be much larger than elsewhere. There are also some timing issues. So some of these cases are cases that we've been working on for a few years. So we may have actually started them a couple of years ago. They've just come to fruition in this year. So there are a number of factors. I don't know if Jonathan wants to add anything to that.
No, I think you answered that absolutely correctly, Max.
Are there any other questions? Nope. Can I just ask you then about the COVID-19 grants, given that you know, we've referred to them in passing throughout tonight's meeting, on page 92, you mention you've investigated 26 cases of potential grant fraud, which have resulted in 15 grants being stopped prepayment or grant money being recovered where it had already been paid. How wide scale do you feel that the COVID-19 grant fraud is? I mean, we've paid out a significant number of claims for a huge amount of money. Are we talking about a really small percentage?
Well, if I can just give a bit of context first. So the first phase, the grant funding, the government were very keen for that funding to be paid out as quickly and promptly as it could be, and a lot of councils actually paid the grants without doing very much in the way of checks. That wasn't the case in York. We did work very closely with the council to make sure that there was a good level of pre-payment assurance checks undertaken. So we probably identified some cases of fraud that may not have been identified if other councils had been doing this. We've also continued to work to identify fraud post payment, so post assurance work, and again we've been quite effective with that. So I think I suspect, Jonathan might correct me, but I suspect we've prevented more fraud in York than perhaps elsewhere, and we may have picked up more fraud already than elsewhere. So the numbers are perhaps higher. I actually think York did the right thing. I think it was right to make sure that checks were undertaken at the outset. So in terms of numbers, I think we paid about 4,000 grants. So the actual numbers are relatively small.
15, yeah. Jonathan, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I suppose we don't quite know the full extent of fraud within grants, even at this stage. So at the moment, we're looking at post-payment assurance on grants that were paid in the first tranche. And my feeling is that actually there's probably less fraud in those, because the fraudsters were taken a bit by surprise as well. So actually we saw a sort of more increased inquiries from people trying to commit fraud towards the back end of the summer. And this isn't just sort of people within York. We're talking about organized criminals who operate within the UK, but also nationally. Now, there's new grants.
I was just going to ask you about that.
There's new grants that have come in more recently, where there's less checks and balances in place. So my feeling is, in general, not specifically about Steve York Council, is that we're going to find more fraud occurring, and the fraudsters sort of understand the systems and the checks that we're undertaking, so they're better prepared. But I'd echo what Max said, that the City of York Council has taken this very seriously. We assisted the council in checking hundreds and hundreds of these grant applications to make sure that they were being paid, that we were satisfied with the information that was given and that they were paid correctly.
Because I've heard about the organised crime gangs that are operating essentially shell companies to make applications. Councillor Webb, you had a supplementary, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose my supplementary is, obviously, thank you for doing work on COVID-19 grant fraud, and it's accounted for 9% of the active investigations. So has that had an effect on your ability to investigate other types of fraud that would happen every other year? Yeah, I suppose that's it. There's only a limited amount of time and energy you can put in. So have you had to limit what you would do in other areas in order to cope with dealing with this?
I think it's inevitable that we've had to sort of reprioritize, and because we've had to put resource into these grants, that's meant doing less work in some other areas. But we've obviously done it in an informed way. So we still, where there are significant frauds either being committed or attempted against the council, we are working hard to prevent that. So there's always this sort of balancing act. We don't have unlimited resources available to us. We do need to have to make some decisions and judgments around where we prioritize that activity. In this case, I think it was right to put a lot of resource into these grants.
Councillor Webb.
Yes, just a quick one. Has that played out in terms of the amount of money recovered from those other areas at all? It might be somewhere in the papers, but it's quite dense.
But based on the current year, we've already exceeded the target. So if you're going to see an impact, it may be next year or the following year. But I'd hope that's not the case. We're still going to go after the major frauds against the council.
Yeah, on the targets, I'd just say obviously the target is quite different to the sort of whether you've made it or not. So I think maybe there's a question there about whether the targets that you're setting are the right values, because there seems to be, if I'm reading it right, quite the successful target rate is 30%. Yet in last year, the 19-20 year, we managed a successful outcome of 64%. So I just wonder if maybe the targets we need to look, I don't know, because that makes me think.
Stretch target, Max?
So the the targets are set by the council, so it's Janie is our client officer, right, talking to Debbie about what is an appropriate target. Now, with fraud, it's actually quite a difficult measure in effect, because you could not look for fraud at all, and you wouldn't find any. But so.
See, this is my question, because if you've got, you can turn around and say, oh great, we beat our target, so therefore we did good. But if you set your target at 1%, of course you've beaten it, but that doesn't mean that you have found all the frauds compared to last year. It doesn't mean you've got as much as last year. So it will probably mean that you've missed stuff. So I suppose that's the question is, yeah. And if you've got a more accurate target or a higher target, that might be a bit better indicator.
Max,
I think I would say that the current target is quite challenging. So we only get there because the team work really hard, and we are good at identifying and recovering fraud losses. So the other point you made about the percentage of successful outcomes, I think there is a correlation between some of the types of fraud, the sort of some of the lower value fraud is actually easier to prove. Some of the big cases take a lot of work and are more challenging, but we might get a successful outcome, but it only counts for one case. So again, it's a measure, but I wouldn't look at it in isolation. You have to look at the sort of the whole picture.
So blue badge fraud is easier than a large scale financial fraud.
I would say they take less resource in total. I wouldn't say it's easier to prove. But.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions in respect of that? Nope. Well, we're asked to note the work that the internal audit fraud team have done, and I would like to thank them on behalf of the committee for exceeding the target in very challenging circumstances. I think it has to be said. It's not an easy environment to be undertaking fraud investigations. So, so I do thank you, and I hope that you will reflect those thanks to your respective teams and teams of managers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So you can both now leave if you choose to, can they? Or do we need no, I'd hang on until we've done the work plan, if that's all right. Okay. Just in case. Agenda item 6 is corporate governance team report to follow. Janie, I'm going to be looking to you to lead on that, I think. Am I?
Sorry, yes, I couldn't find my microphone button.
That's
Sorry
okay.
about that. So yes, this is a report that my colleague Lorraine Lunt has prepared, and you've accepted it as a late item for inclusion in the agenda. So given that you just invited Max to stay for the work programme,
we'll look at it at the end.
It's up to you, Chair, which order of
No,
business.
we'll look at it. We'll look at it at the end. Absolutely. Now, in between 7 and 8, I did have a conversation this morning with, or this afternoon with Janie regarding full council, and it's not on the agenda and there are no minutes, but I did agree that she should make a statement to the committee for our noting. Jenny.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I highlighted to Councillor Pavlovic this afternoon in his capacity as the Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee that myself and the Chief Operating Officer have prepared a report for full council, which has been published today. I wanted to give you the assurance that this is not around a governance concern, but it's actually a governance-based report to allow for consideration by full council of approvals to be given for the City of York Council to fully participate in the local government reorganisation consultation exercise, which the government is about to launch. So it was just bringing this to your attention. It is absolutely within the council procedure rules for a non-budget item to be included on the Budget Council agenda, and the Lord Mayor has accepted it. So it has been published in accordance with all of the other items on Budget Council agenda. But it is a technical report that is being asked to be considered by full council from myself and the Chief Operating Officer, and it builds upon the recommendations which were given by to full council, in October 2020 as well. So it's a governance-based report, but it's quite technical as well. So I just wanted to raise that to members' attention this evening.
Yeah, which is why, given that it's a governance issue, but it's already published, I didn't want us to be left out of the loop, although it is a fait accompli because it has been published. So, but it had to be, if that makes sense. It had to come out today. Are there any questions regarding this technical report on local government reorganisation and the consultation process? I'll take silence as assent. Right, perfect, thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 7, which is the work plan. And I'm glad to see the work plan on this agenda, given that I have to say we have had recent committees where it has been absent, and
yes.
And just in respect of that, I think I speak on behalf of the whole committee when I say that the work plan really ought to be on every agenda, because it does need to be amended from time to time, and work plans I feel should be on every committee's agenda. I don't sit on every committee, so I don't look at them all, but I do think it is a fundamental process by which the public can understand how the council is conducting its business. So I'll leave it there, but I don't expect to not see it again. Let's put it that way. Okie dokie. Debbie, Janie, hand over to you.
So I do take on board your comments. I did offer my apologies at the last meeting chaired by Councillor Fisher, because it was a genuine human error oversight that it didn't appear on the agenda. So I do take that on board, and again apologise for that. There is just one issue that both Debbie and I can update with, is that following the last meeting, we have spoken to the head of HR about her report for the NDA issues. She advised us that her normal practice is to provide a report at the end of the financial year and do a retrospective review, and she's asked us to ask the committee to include it at an appropriate time on the work plan for this evening. So we did ask her, and that is her response. So she's happy to bring a report, but she will ask to bring it at the end of the financial year, and it will be a retrospective review of what has happened during the course of that year. The other issue that is just to reference, Chair, is that I'm conscious that the review of the council's constitution is a floating item towards the end of the work plan, and I think hopefully if we can work towards sort of at the end of April for it to come to Audit and Governance Committee, that would allow time for me to circulate drafts and consult with all councillors and all key stakeholders as well within the council for enable to inform Audit and Governance's Committee's views and the feedback that we've had. I'm just mindful that in almost 12 months ago, when we did a dotting I's and crossing T's exercise of the Constitution, that took about 4 hours. And so it may be that it's a single item agenda or a very short agenda to allow members enough time to go through the Constitution. And so conscious it might be quite a late evening and need a couple of adjournments.
Yeah, I am mindful of that. Councillor Webb, your thoughts?
I have many thoughts on the Constitution. I think one thing, Janie, would be, and this is just a request for members, is if we have it, say, at the end of April, and if you've sort of consulted on it with groups and members of the council in March, if we could get a copy of it as members of this committee with more than a week's notice, I think that would really help things move along, because, you know, me reading at 5 o'clock in the morning after work or before work or whatever it is not going to lead me to ask the best sensible questions on the evening. So the longer notice, the better.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that it's quite large, so I'm hopeful that we'd find a mechanism whereby you can access it for at least a couple of weeks as well, before it comes to Audit and Governance Committee, because I do anticipate that you may have questions to ask prior to getting to committee as well. So I think I've previously discussed this with Councillor Pavlovic and Councillor Fisher about having an ongoing dialogue or a small cross-party working group to help support the views when we get to Audit and Governance Committee as well. Certainly, it's been a recommendation of the chair for that to happen. So yes, I've got the first draft of it at the moment, which is my rough working draft to write on and rewrite, etc. And so, yeah, I do hope to be able to start circulating it for consideration, you know, in draft form consideration shortly, because it is sort of quite large.
And I think just to sort of recap on where we are and where we've been, is I think when we embarked on this process, Janie was relatively new in post, and what we'd agreed in her first few weeks and with the previous monitoring officer in post was more of a dotting the I's and crossing the T's, I think it's been referred to, exercise. I think what we've subsequently discovered, and I think we've had reported to us en passant during the year, is that this is a far more fundamental review of the Constitution than was originally planned. I don't think I'm overstating it, am I, monitoring officer? No. And so consequently, it's kind of like something that we're going to have to put some time into, because it covers committee structures, it covers delegated powers, it covers procurement, it covers, you know, the whole gamut essentially of how this council operates, and it's not just about putting new legislative changes in. So are we all happy with a single item agenda? Feasibly the 28th of April. Is that cool with everybody?
Happy is not the word, Councillor Pavlovic.
Well, of course,
maybe resigned
no,
to the fact. Let's put it that way.
No. But if we're going to get it to annual, if we're going to get it in front of annual council, which is I think the 27th of May. Did somebody tell me?
Yes, it is. It is, Chair. It's the 27th of May.
Yeah, and it has to be considered at annual council. Councillor Lomas, before you come in, Dawn. Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I don't have any issues with the date itself. Just noting that day is Workers' Memorial Day. Probably quite apt if we are going to be spending a significant amount of time on a single item agenda, and just a plea for breaks to be built into that to make sure that we all remain safe and healthy.
Yeah, no, absolutely taken on board. And somebody needs to wear a better watch than I do and tell me when we're at an hour, so that I can factor these breaks in, because I was an hour and 20 minutes this time. So yeah, absolutely taken on board that. Dawn, you were going to chip in.
I was only just going to say, just bear with us on the date, because obviously we've not checked that out in terms of other commitments that evening. So
okay.
Somewhere around then we'll look for.
Yeah, towards the end, but and then now I've got something that I need to talk to committee about, which is the March meeting date of the 10th of March. And I'm sorry that I've had the opportunity to speak with Debbie, but I haven't had the opportunity to speak with Janie, because this was literally about 40 minutes before we had to get ready for committee. I did speak with the external auditors about whether they would be in a position to have their investigations concluded, the report written, peer reviewed, and published in good time for the 10th of March, and they just don't think that that's a feasible option for them. They did suggest that the end of March might be possible, and however, I think there might possibly be a clash if we're fixed on a Wednesday. So I'm going to open this out to members, but we're going to have to pull the 10th of March. It's going to have to slip this agenda item, but it was always fluid. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovic. I think it's worth stating that this is very frustrating. The council still has not had its accounts signed off from last year. And this is, you know, if actually the reason that this is taking so long is because it's public interest, well, this is making things even worse by it taking longer and longer each time. Have we got any reason for why this is taking longer?
Basically, all the interviews are now finished. They are now in a process of considering their conclusions and the report that they are having to produce. This, as we all know, colleagues and officers, was in relation to a significant issue. And we did say at the time that it would take as long as it takes. You know, we penciled in March. I think this was in October? I think it might have been, or it might have been the November meeting, but it was certainly around that time. That it wasn't an issue that could be or should be rushed. And you know, if Mazars are saying that they can't have it ready for the 10th of March, I personally don't feel that we should get something that's rushed, because there is a legal process that needs to be followed, depending on what conclusions they come to. You know, if there are you know, it has to be peer reviewed. It has to be, the report has to be written. It has to be independently peer reviewed. It has to go to if any officers or members are referred to specifically in the report, they have to then have the opportunity to be consulted and to comment. So there is a process, and it's just I don't think appropriate to try to pin them down to the 10th of March date. But you still got your hand up, Councillor Webb, so I'm more than happy to, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I totally agree. It has to be done right. This is an incredibly serious situation, and we want to make sure that if, you know, there is any impropriety, as was discussed previously, that is investigated thoroughly. But it is, and I think it's important to note at this meeting that this is becoming more and more embarrassing, regardless of the outcome. I suppose my other question is about process. Is you know, when we get the report, is there anything that we then have to do with it? If for example, we were told, well, actually, we don't agree, the accounts, I mean, are we going to get sort of told that the accounts can't be signed off or could be signed off, and therefore that's that? Or, you know, do we need to get, as a committee, get a process in place for different possible outcomes? Because what I don't want to happen is Mazars to do their bit and then it's come to us, and then us not going to be able to fit anything in for the next 4 or 5 months because we've got loads of things on this work plan. So yeah.
Before I hand over to Janie or Debbie to comment, I've made it absolutely crystal clear to both the Section 151 and the monitoring officer that this agenda item, this issue has its own meeting, and if a meeting has to be scheduled, that it is scheduled. It does not fall at the back of a lengthy agenda of another meeting. It's what this committee agreed at the time, that this was a matter that would come to council, that it to committee, and that it would come to committee as a single agenda item meeting. It will be facilitated as soon as it possibly can be, and I think you're just going to have to trust myself and Councillor Fisher to ensure that it is fitted in as soon as is humanly possible. Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, I have confidence that you and Councillor Fisher will work that in to the schedule for us. I suppose my concern is that there is already a busy schedule of council meetings requiring the you know, the resources to put them on. So you know, given that we are still likely to be conducting meetings in a virtual way next month, that my concern is that we may all be willing to come together and have that meeting, but if there isn't the appropriate resource there in terms of the availability of people to do the technical things and the technical equipment required, then we're going to struggle. So I suppose it's not only a question of will you prioritise it, it's a question of will it be prioritised in the working of the general of the council in general in terms of virtual meetings.
I'm going to hand over to Debbie and or Janie, because there are issues in respect of the audited accounts that are of relevance here, as it relates to this investigation. Debbie, I'm going to hand over to you for basically to go through what you discussed with me earlier.
Yeah, so to be honest, as you would expect, it depends what Mazars come up with in terms of their findings. So we can't prejudge the outcome of their investigation. So there are two possibilities. One is that they feel it warrants a public interest report. Now, should it need a public interest report, the council very much gets a right of reply on that to consider. So myself and Janie and the Chief Operating Officer will go through that and and make sure that we also feel it accurately reflects the situation. I'm sure it will do, but there's an opportunity for us to do that. And then, of course, it has to go to full council. So that's the first point of call. And my understanding would be that if it is a public interest report, this committee's remit will be in monitoring the actions from that public interest report. It will go straight to full council. It will not pass go. It will not collect £200 straight to full council. If what happens is it's not public.
Sorry, can I just interrupt there? Will that be a separate will that be a separately called,
yes, it has to be an extraordinary meeting. It
yeah.
has to be an extraordinary meeting of full council, and it has to be a single item agenda full council meeting. So if it's a public interest report, it does not come to audit and governance first. It goes directly to an extraordinary meeting of full council.
And is there a time limit on
yes,
that from publication to the extraordinary meeting being held? Is it 28 days?
I think from memory, I'd have to just check on that. But yes, there is a time limit in which we have to bring it. It's either 28 or 35 days, but there is a time limit by which we have to have held that extraordinary meeting of full council. Full council will be asked to approve the action plan that is associated with a public interest report, and it's the action plan that is then monitored at future meetings of Audit and Governance Committee.
Hopefully, we're not in that position. And
no.
It's just the normal audit completion report with a series of actions, which is what you would expect normally. So you would normally see at this committee the audit completion report that would outline for you the findings of the audit, their recommendations, a management response or an officer response to those recommendations. And again, you would, as a committee, we would come back to you to update you on the progress of those actions. But again, it would be an agreed series of actions between officers and the external auditors. And again, as a committee, you would monitor those actions. So either way, there's a role for this committee in monitoring what comes next. It's just at this point, I don't know where Mazars will go in terms of their findings as a result of their investigation. So it very much depends on the outcome of their investigation, and that's what we don't know at this point in time.
Katie, are you happy with that, or it doesn't in the same position that you outlined?
Yeah, and I suspect there's nobody sort of in this meeting that can really comment whether we will be able to fit our meeting in, and I recognise that's a challenge, but I think it definitely is a consideration, and I think that representations will need to be made to whoever makes decisions about allocating the resource to hold meetings, that this needs to be a priority, because whether or not whatever the outcome is, we as this committee need the opportunity to discuss that report.
Yeah, I've got both Councillor Fisher and Councillor Mason. I'm going to go to Councillor Fisher first, because I suspect it is a supplementary to the point that Councillor Lomas has made.
It's about the scheduling of the meeting. I've just had a look through the calendar. There is a slot on the 30th of March where there are no other meetings planned anywhere at council. Now, it's a Tuesday. Whether or not that would suit with members, might it be, bearing in mind Mazars may come with their report by the end of March, would it be sensible to actually provisionally book a meeting of Audit and Governance for that night, so we've got a clear night when there's no other council committees on?
Councillor Mason.
Yeah, one of my.
Are you going to make a different point, or?
No, I was going to say the same. Obviously, the CSMC, we seem to have kind of pre-booked meetings that sometimes happen, kind of pre-booked call-in things and whatever else. So it doesn't seem impossible to do the same for this. And if we don't use it, we cancel it.
Dawn.
The only comment I would make to that is the scrutiny forums. I don't know, without going into look into another document, whether any scrutiny forums on that particular night, but that's something we can check really easily.
Yes, there are.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, Councillor Webb. Before I go to you, Councillor Webb, I'm a bit confused, Debbie. You say this dependent on what the report is, but if it's a PIR, it doesn't come to us.
No, it goes straight to full council. It doesn't come here first. It goes straight to full council because of the time limits. It goes straight to full council. You can then discuss it here afterwards in terms of the monitoring of the actions, but the very first part of call for it is full council. Is that that's right, Jenny? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct. It is. A public interest report does not come here first. It goes straight to full council, and then it's full council that asks the Audit and Governance Committee to monitor the action plan.
Right. Okay. Okay, never been involved with one of these before, so
Chair, I think in terms of dates, because the calendar is so complicated because of the forums that we've mentioned, whether an idea is that we liaise outside, conscious of time, but we liaise outside of this meeting with all members here this evening around a potential sort of selection of dates that take in the end of March, during April, etc., so that it provides members with an opportunity to give comment on a number of dates.
Yeah, I mean, we are second guessing what's going to happen. So, oh gosh, lots of hands. Councillor Webb had his hand up first, and then I'll go to Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, I think on the forums, I think anything like that, whilst, you know, it is very important that those forums take place. Obviously, this, and despite what people said earlier, this is not a normal audit situation to be in. I don't care what anybody says, we shouldn't be in this situation. So I think that this kind of meeting has to take priority. And if I'm right from what I'm hearing, then it would only come to us and we'd only need that meeting if actually this impropriety wasn't an issue and we needed to look at what was happening normally. But I think this is clearly not a normal situation. And yeah, I think that meeting has to sort of take priority, because even if it is left with us poor people here, I think there's still an absolute need for lessons to be learned straight away, because it's just a shambles now.
Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, if I can, Janie, to explain why we wouldn't receive the audit report, regardless of a PIR process that would go straight to full council. Does that mean we wouldn't get the opportunity to look at the audit report? Because I understand that an outcome of the process that Mazars are following could be a public interest report, but regardless of that, would we not still get a report of the audit that has triggered that process? I'm not clear on the interdependency of those two things, but I believe that we should still have the opportunity to receive and discuss the audit report.
So in terms of if this is a public interest report that goes straight to full council with an associated action plan for approval by full council, you would need the public interest report after that meeting of full council in order to use that as the background to work through the action plan and to ensure that the actions have been acted upon, lessons learned and implemented, etc. So it would not be anticipated that you'd have a re-debate of the public interest report and amend the action plan, because full council had already done that. But again, we're speculating because I don't know what Mazars action are going to take, I'm afraid. So
no, Katie, sorry, Councillor Lomas, I'll go back to you, but I don't think that's the question you were asking, was it?
It isn't.
No.
We haven't yet had the audit report from Mazars. Whether or not the outcome of their current investigation triggers a public interest report or not, do we not still get to look at and discuss the audit report? So I'm not speculating about the public interest. Yes.
Sorry.
So we would still need to have a meeting of this committee to look at the auditor's report on our accounts. There may be other things other than that one specific area that we would want to question and make sure we understand. So I'm not at all speculating on the outcome of their investigation that has been triggered by their auditing of our accounts. I am asking why we would not have the meeting that we ordinarily would have to look at their audit report.
So you would receive the Mazars audit report, generally that accompany the statement of the accounts. Depending on the outcome and the recommendations that external audit make, depends on whether we're in a position or not to sign off the accounts and the associated annual governance statement. So again, it's a lot of speculation. So because I don't know what their findings are going to be, and they may be quite profound that has an impact on the annual governance statement, for example, or the statement of accounts. I just don't know. But yes, you will receive an audit report from them that will accompany the accounts process.
I mean, we have got them. In for. I know that's April 2022. When are they next scheduled to?
They're on every agenda.
Every agenda.
Yeah, but they're a slot on every agenda, so whenever they're ready, they can.
It's the dark blue line on the work plan.
Yeah, sorry, we get black and white.
Oh, so they're on every agenda. Prints. So they're on the work plan for an item on every agenda of the meetings that we have scheduled.
Right, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of one final point on this. Going back to the conversation you've had with Mazars about this issue. Obviously, this was referred to as there's 3 points. I'm reading the audit and governance papers from before Christmas, whenever it was. There was 3 points. There was the further information needed to support a larger than usual increase in the valuation of heritage assets was now available. It was hoped to conclude this matter soon. That's point 1. Point 2 was the COVID-19 pandemic was relevant to the valuation of property assets. And point 3 was the ongoing work in relation to severance pay to the former chief executive would take into account public complaints irrelevant and was unlikely to conclude before February 21. So of those 3 things, there's only one that's actually got a date on it. Could I just get clarification? Was there any indication of, from those 3 points, which one was the stick? Was it?
Point 3.
Point 3. Okay, so that was the ongoing work in relation to severance pay to the former chief exec. Cheers.
That's my understanding, unless either Debbie or Janie want to correct me on that.
That's my
I think the assets. I think the assets. That valuation was done not long after, if not after Christmas. It might have even been before Christmas, wasn't it?
All the accounting are in. All the accounting issues have been dealt with and resolved. It's just that one outstanding sort of non-financial issue, if you like.
That was my understanding. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, sorry to keep coming back to this, but I'm really concerned. I don't think it's correct to say that Mazars are on every agenda because they're not here tonight and they weren't on the agenda for tonight. We've just been told that the meeting in March, which we had put in the calendar in order to get the report from Mazars about the audit and the accounts, has been cancelled, and I'm very concerned that we need to have something in place on the work plan where we say, we expect that it'll be done by the end of March. That's great. Let's put something in, and as Councillor Mason says, we can put something in, and if we need to cancel it or change it, then we can cancel it or change it. But I'm very concerned that we don't have a slot in to look at the accounts from the previous financial year, and that we've all spoken about the difficulty of getting meetings booked in, and given the challenges and the workload that this committee has, I think that we need to have something booked in to look at that, and if we need to change it, then we change it, and that would be great, and I'm sure everyone will do their best to work with that.
I'm 100% in agreement with that, and it's the conversation I had with Mazars. They were really hopeful that they would have something by the end of March. I feel that if we can facilitate the end of March, even if there are forums ongoing, if we can be flexible as today, as opposed to date, I'm sure that Dawn and the Democratic Services team and Janie can find a slot for us. Shall I leave it there? Yeah. Great. So were there any other bits of the work plan that anybody wanted to comment on? Councillor Webb.
I'll say one thing. Obviously, there was the 8 points that the public speaker raised, and it's just how are we gonna? Because I don't intend to deal with that now, but I think there's 8 points on there, and how are the committee members going to sort of get a response on those 8 points? Because I think some of them we're probably going to build in anyway into this work plan, and they're already sorted there. But there are several that it would be only right for us to sort of get a response.
Absolutely.
We can take that away and have a look at them. And if somebody can send me the list, I must admit I didn't write them down.
I didn't write the list down, but the public participant said she would email it to yourself, to Jenny, and to me. So
we'll work through that list and send it back round to people with an outline.
Yeah. So there are some things in here that are set in stone that we can't let slip, and they are the draft statement of accounts and some statutory responsibilities that we have. I don't see there being anything else other than we seem to have a gap between September 2021 and December 2021. I thought we'd agreed in the when this committee first started that we would have an October meeting on an annual basis. Everybody's still happy with the idea of an October meeting. Does anybody have an alternative proposal? No. Can we factor in an October meeting then, or maybe even the beginning of November, but one way or the around about that time?
Yes, we can have a look, Chair.
Yeah. I'm surprised it's not in, given that it was something that the committee said that it wanted. So it ought to be in the calendar. No, I'm not looking at you. I'm just saying, I'm just expressing some surprise. Councillor Fisher.
I think there may be some confusion that we arranged one last year. I think the intention was always to have a meeting every October to fill in the gap between the September and December meetings. So I think it's too long a gap. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding that it was going to be a perennial meeting and not an annual meeting.
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what it was. So right, shall we now go to the slipped agenda item 6? Which is now agenda item 8, urgent business, and perhaps somebody, maybe Janie, ought to explain why this is not the substantive agenda item 6. It's now become agenda item 8, urgent business.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to find it. It's on a separate page.
It's on a separate annex.
It is completely, and I think if I move my computer at the minute, it'll just turn off. So I do apologise for this.
Shall I give an explanation?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Hello, Chair. Hello, Committee. This is the regular information governance and complaints report, and it is solely. It was late being sent into publication and finalised because I didn't have the date of the February audit and governance in my work calendar. It was solely down to my mistake.
Okay. Right, that's accepted. Mistakes happen, but we've got the future dates all identified, and it's not ideal that reports reports have to be published under urgent business. So, so yeah, thank you very much. Now I'll hand over to you, Lorraine, to introduce the report.
Hello everybody again. My name's Lorraine Lunt. I'm the Council's Information Governance and Feedback Team Manager. I'm also the Council's Data Protection Officer. This is your regular report to Audit and Governance Committee covering those areas of information governance performance, Information Commissioner's Office's decision notice, an update on the publishing of the disclosure log on the Council's website, any Ombudsman cases and any other relevant updates around information governance and complaints from the previous report to Audit and Governance. If I move on to the next stage, which is information governance performance, and draw your attention to the Annex 1, you will see that I've put them in a different style and format to what you had last report. This was taken into account comments on the previous format because we're trying to get to an agreed way forward and what style, charts, information you would like to see on these performance reports going forward. What I'd like to draw your attention to is that there has been an increase in this reporting period, October to December, up to 555 FOI and EIR requests received by the Council. That was compared to 486 in the previous reporting quarter. It's also an increase on the number received in the same reporting period in October-December 2019. Just like to say that that doesn't mean that we are not an open and transparent council, but it's just that information is being requested from the council. A number of FOI and EIR requests are pointed directly to where the information is already publicly available, but that is still considered and counted as an FOI or EIR request. I'd like to draw your attention to that despite the difficulties on resources and capacity across all the different teams within the council from COVID-19 and our contingency plans to help support service areas in responding to FOI, EIR and other rights of information requests, we continue to maintain just over an 80% in-time performance for all those combined requests. Just an update on the work across the different information governance network groups. Again, that work has stalled and is still ongoing to look at what benchmarking and comparative data we can all share and put in these types of reports going forward. On to the Information Commissioner Office's decision notices. Those since the last report to you in November, there has been one further published decision note by the ICO, and that was where they upheld on behalf of the complainant, and we have completed and complied with all the ICO's findings in that case. We will, of course, ensure that any learning that has to be applied to other types of requests of a similar nature where those exemptions need to be applied, we will make sure that happens. The disclosure log is where we publish on the website the FOI and EIR requests received by the Council, and we're continuing to monitor along with the web services team within the Council the appetite and demand that disclosure log has compared to how the FOI and EIR responses were previously published. Moving on to complaints, Annex 3, we have given you the summary again from the Ombudsman, including the Local Government, Social Care Ombudsman and One Housing Ombudsman decision in the last reporting period. And those are shown at Annex 3. You will see that the case determined by the Housing Ombudsman and 6 cases were determined by the Local Government Social Care Ombudsman since the last report of the 7th of November. 2 of these were closed after the Ombudsman's initial inquiries, and 5 were upheld with recommendations and or remedies for the complainant and or for the Council to put in place. We've shown those at Annex 3 under the actions column, but it's worth noting as well that in one upheld case, the Ombudsman noted that we had already put in place all the remedies that they did put into their case decision. We continue to work with the corporate management team, directorate management teams on ensuring that we have timely responses and also getting them to complete their actions. There is a national complaints manager group that works closely with the Ombudsman on these types of issues, and that the Ombudsman has reminded us that we need to let them know as soon as possible of any difficulties, that we can work with them so that we can make sure the information is provided and actions complied with appropriately and in a timely way. Following the committee's approval and support of the move towards a toolkit and a 4Cs approach for complaints, concerns and comments, we've also now been to Customer Corporate Scrutiny Services Scrutiny Management Committee. That is a mouthful, you must forgive me. And they too also supported the move to this new corporate toolkit. I've committed to providing both of these committees later this year on the performance and the implementation of that new corporate toolkit from April this year. For your information, there are other updates around the information governance and complaints teamwork. The Council's Senior Information Risk Owner, otherwise known as CIRO, is a role that Janie fulfills for us. That came out of the health and social care measures and as part of the NHS Digital Data Security and Protection Toolkit. That's an annual assessment that we must provide evidence and information on how well we do data protection, information governance, and how we look at the privacy of individuals. That role works closely with other roles in the council, such as the DPO, the Quality Court Guardian, and the information asset owners across the council. And we're now looking at putting an action and an implementation plan in place to ensure that the CIRO can lead and promote that culture and advise the council on information risk issues. I'm proposing that we put a regular report to CMT and also to this committee on at least an annual basis that covers those CIRO action plans and improvements and outcomes. Following on from the support and approval from the two committees, we are moving ahead with the go live of the 4Cs toolkit in April. And we are now working on what that performance report will need to look like. And I propose that I will provide that in the next report to committee in July, so that from September onwards you have that ongoing performance measure, and that you will have a template prior to that, or a draft template, so that you can comment and feed into that before I produce the report in July for you. We're continuing to work on embedding records management across the council, and we're introducing parts of a toolkit known as building blocks, the first two of which are classifying information and filing folder naming strategies. This will provide us with an opportunity to improve how we search and retrieve information in a timely way, but also ensure that we can classify our information in our documents in a much more improved and robust and consistent manner. We continue to meet with York Explore and the City Archives so that we can work together in that transfer of records to them, and also ensuring records continuity and preservation. We are looking at how we improve and make sure we meet the new IPCO, which is the Investigative Powers Commissioners, requirements for next year's report to them. But just to confirm to committee that we have submitted within the timescale and deadline this year's report to them. You may recall earlier on Max mentioned covert surveillance. So this is part of that process where we look into managing and monitoring those requests for that type of covert surveillance, including any use of covert human intelligence sources. We're soon looking to implement and go live with an online tool that will support the completion of risk assessments, which are usually known as data protection impact assessments. And that ensures that we do data protection by design and default, which is enshrined in the legislation and is a requirement from both that legislation and the ICO's guidance. It'll enable us to do a much more robust and consistent and timely risk assessment, and also make sure that we are able to report better and in a more timely way on those risks, both to yourselves where required, to the CIRO, CMT and senior managers. We've recently updated our name, which is why this report is also shown on the agenda as the Corporate Governance Team report. And the last bit of my report is just to reflect that that's the new name and to seek committee's support to rename this report going forward, rather than just focusing on information governance and complaints, but focusing on the wider work of the team known as the corporate governance team, which includes all those other areas such as RIPA, CHIS, records management, etc. So really, I just then over to the recommendations is that I'd ask committee to note the report, note the performance in the annexes, and if you agree with the change of title for this report going forward.
Lovely. I've got Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody. A couple of questions. In terms of the exemption we relied upon on the ICO published decision, can you just tell us what that exemption was that we'd kind of initially tried to use, or I think it was the third time we'd used it? And then I've got another one if you can answer that one quickly.
Okay, so the one that we looked at relying on was manifestly unreasonable. So that has a large checklist, for want of a better expression, on information that we need to look at and be able to evidence why we've decided or would look to apply that. When we submitted the evidence back to the ICO in their investigation, they felt that we had not applied it in its full and correct manner. So they asked us to reissue the response to the request where we did not rely on that.
Oh, and then in the, I think it's Annex 3, basically all the little columns at the back pages. Yeah. One of them relates to land behind somebody's house, and they stopped their kind of investigation because they said they wouldn't be able to provide a remedy. I just wondered what that actually meant in terms of why they stopped it, just because it's out of their remit, or?
When they don't take a complaint forward, it's usually because it is outside of their remit. But what I can do is look at the full judgment and decision notice that and case that we got back from the Ombudsman on that case, and resubmit it round to all committee members.
It sounded more like a kind of planning inspectorate type one, really, given what it said. But I just thought maybe that was why, because it was out of their kind of normal thing.
And look at what the full decision was on why they decided that their decision was it as shown, and give you their explanation for that.
Thank you.
And what I can do as well, if it would be helpful, is where there are those types of out of the ordinary decisions, put the fuller explanation in, if that would be helpful going forward.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then my last point, I suppose, more is for the committee and for you, Chair. Obviously happy to have the report renamed, and I think, you know, finding out more about CHIS and things like that would be exciting, quite interesting.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there any other questions from you? Oh, sorry, Councillor Fisher. I'm missing these little blue hands until somebody tells me that it's gone up.
It's a little orange hand on mine. I don't know about yours.
All right, lovely.
I'd like to ask, if you notice the statistics, the data, the SARs always seem to be substantially low. What's the particular problem with subject access to records and doing them in a timely manner? Is there a particular reason for it?
Subject access records are usually, and that's the reason why it can sometimes take a longer than the month timescale that there is to respond to it. Very complex collation of information from all the systems that will include Skype messages, conversation histories. It could be people's notebooks, it could be people's diaries. So the complexity around searching and retrieving all the requested information, because whilst an individual can say they just want their information that council tax holds, sometimes that's not often. Most of the requests are for all the information that the council holds. We then have to, once that information is all retrieved, we then have to ensure that we go through it very carefully so that we're not breaching anybody else's data, any other confidential information, or if any other information needs to be withheld, because it may identify somebody else, and or there's an ongoing investigation somewhere else, and or there's another case that may then jeopardize. There's a lot of work, a lot of complexity, and that is why it is sometimes a lower in time percentage. It is significantly improving year on year. When we had the ICO auditors themselves in a number of years ago, subject access requests was an area, scope scope area that they did look at. And at that point, we were around about 50%, if not less, in time. And that's when you had slightly longer as well to reply. So it is a mixture of complexity, the skills and expertise to do any redactions and check-in, and then getting that information all collated and out to the requester.
Thank you for that.
Are there any other questions? So can I just ask about themes, learning objectives and themes, and how that's fed through, and what, how you evidence that any themes have been taken on board and reduced subsequently, because there just seems to be a number of recurrent communication issues, time and time again, dependent on which department it is, seems immaterial.
Do you mean the learning and lessons learned from FOI, EIRs and SARS and or ombudsman cases and complaints?
Yeah, no,
the
complaints
okay.
and the findings, you know, where maladministration or failings within the authority, how's that then fed through to that department as a set of learning objectives? Because it does mention them in certainly in some of them. How does that get reflected? How does that get fed? Does it get fed back to you for subsequent measuring?
Yes, it does. The current process for dealing with complaints and ombudsman cases, we have a process where we do lessons learned and action plans with the service areas, not just at ombudsman case level, but also at the other levels. Mm-hmm. And part of that lessons learned and themes and actions are put back into team meetings, team training, support, advice and guidance that my team provide to service areas in responding to complaints. The other part of that process is that we take forward into the new toolkit a much more robust way of ensuring that we get those lessons learned, where the service is going to be now delivered end to end from within the team. We can much more effectively and robustly ensure those lessons learned are adopted and are pulled through into seeing hopefully a reduction in those types of decisions and outcomes from an ombudsman case, and or a reduction in those types of complaints reaching an ombudsman in the first instance. So yes, it's a work in progress. There's always room for improvement, and we will continue to keep doing that and progressing that.
Because if I remember correctly, that was one of the rationales behind the introduction of the new toolkit, wasn't it?
It is very much so, that we can close that circle, for want of a better expression, on a complaint being raised, investigated, decisions and remedies or outcomes reached, and ensuring that we help and support services in reducing those recurring themes wherever we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Are there any other questions? If not, Councillor Fisher's computer's about to die because his battery's running out. So unless there are any further questions, I will thank you, Lorraine. We shall see you again in April.
April 14th.
Yes, hopefully that report won't be late.
It won't. It's in my diary in double red. I do really, though, sincerely apologise that it came late.
Don't worry. There is no urgent or any other business. So unless somebody's telling me I've missed anything, I'm going to call this meeting to a close. And thank you all very, very much for your contributions. I think it's been an interesting agenda. Not particularly well chaired, but I think everybody else contributed beautifully. So so thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, what's left of it, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.